The Brothers Karamazov, Book 7, Chapter 2. Hear now this quote from C.S. Lewis, his work, The Four Loves. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries, avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. So Lewis is saying that to be a person who loves people, that's going to involve risk and vulnerability, and the chance of hurt is almost 100%. Either the person will do something to break your heart, you will do something to break their heart, thus breaking your heart, or the person will be taken from you. And so to love is to be vulnerable. And so why do I bring this up? Because I think Lewis could have penned those words directly after reading this chapter, and I think that this is the main point that the author wants us to understand. Alyosha is heartbroken, but the source of his heartbrokenness is not a mere lack of faith, but rather an extreme love for his elder, Zosima. Why? Because just 2 books ago, in Book 5, the 4th and 5th chapters, Ivan has given his arguments against Christianity to Alyosha. In chapter 4 of Book 5, he's talked about the injustice that we see in the world towards innocent children. Innocent people suffer in this world. Then in the next chapter, the most famous chapter in the entire novel, the Grand Inquisitor, the Inquisitor reminds Christ of the second temptation by Satan, and that was the temptation of a miracle to throw himself off of a high place so that the angels could protect him. And so in those 2 chapters, those 2 criticisms, Ivan is saying a very similar thing. I think more strongly in the 4th chapter, he's saying that there is a lack of justice in God's world. And he even says it's not that he's an atheist, he just rejects the world that God has created. So there is a lack of justice because innocent people suffer. Then in a similar, but I think a less stinging way, he talks about the second temptation in the Grand Inquisitor chapter in Book 5, Chapter 5. And there he says the second temptation was that Christ made people with their free wills rely on faith and not on a miracle, that it's hard to believe just on faith, that people need even more compelling reason to believe. And so that Christ should not have resisted that temptation. Christ should have given in to that temptation so that people wouldn't have to believe. And so that is the indictment given by Ivan of Christianity. And so now we have Alyosha almost living out the very scenario that Ivan has criticized Christianity. So if you see it on a kind of a spectrum, to the one end, you have injustice, and the other end you have miracle, and at the exact middle of the spectrum you have justice. So if you look at this event of Zosima dying, well, on the most hopeful religious end, Zosima's death would be met with a miracle. Maybe people would be healed by coming in contact with his corpse. But at the other end of the spectrum, injustice, you would have what seems to have actually happened, that his corpse would not only not miraculously not decay, but rather his corpse would decay even quicker than expectation. And so that is a lack of justice. And so this chapter is going out of its way to say Alyosha doesn't need a miracle. He doesn't need the Grand Inquisitor's reminder of the second temptation of Christ. He doesn't need a miracle to believe. But the chapter 4 of book 5 stuff is what's hard. The lack of justice and injustice in the world. And so here is Zosima, who's not an innocent child, but he's still a pure man, and now his name is being defamed, and all the good work he did, all the true teaching he taught in his life is being seriously called into question because his corpse stinks. And so Alyosha is upset because he loves the man. He's not upset at the lack of miracle, but he is upset at the injustice. So I hope looking at those things on a spectrum. So maybe all the way to the left, injustice, all the way to the right, miracle, and right in the dead center, justice. Alyosha is basically embodying this. Look, God, I'm not asking for much. I'm not asking for anything supernatural to sustain my faith, but I don't need my faith tested in what? In sort of my idol, the one that I've put all my hope and affection into, the one that I've made my heart vulnerable to, which is why I read that C.S. Lewis quote, the one I've put all my hope into. There is a very evident lack of justice. And so where do I get this interpretation from? Well, I think that the narrator makes it clear, because as we meet Rakitin as we meet again nasty old seminary student Rakitin at the end of the chapter, he's making fun of Alyosha's crisis of faith, basically saying, you don't believe just because of this. You sure talked a good game, but now when you meet just a little bit of turbulence with your faith, you give up so soon. And Rakitin is really laughing at Alyosha. And what does Alyosha do? He says, my problem is not with God. My problem is with the world. I reject the world that he created, which is, of course, an exact quote from Ivan. And so I think the narrator, and not so subtly, is asking us with that quote to go back to Ivan's arguments. And basically, everything that was theory to Ivan, or at least a newspaper story, or parabolic in the case of the Grand Inquisitor, Alyosha is now living in that real world of injustice, and he doesn't like it, and he's depressed. And so what do depressed young Christian men, what are they prone to? Well, you see an evident lack of justice on God's part, and so you reason that you owe some indulgence, that you owe some you're owed some cutting some corners. And so he breaks the dietary laws of the monastery. He'll have a sausage. He'll have vodka. And yeah, I will go to Grushenka's house. And so a sour, dour note. So we have depressed, teary-eyed Alyosha. He's sad. He's saying things that seem completely out of his character. He's bringing God to account for how he works in this world, accusing God of a lack of justice. And not only is he downcast, and not only is he saying things that a young monk to be, even though he's going out into the world, really ought not say things out of line with his theology. He's pairing that with eating sausage, drinking vodka, and on his way to Grushenka. And if we think we know Grushenka's character thus far, she might be one of the last young ladies that we would want Alyosha to be on his way to see. So dark, dark times for the hero of the novel. But again, I think that the main point of the chapter is this, that Alyosha's struggle, his discouragement and depression are not because he has a weak faith, because he needs miracles to believe. Rather, his struggle stems from his deep and abiding love to Father Zosima and the injustice that his rotting, stinking corpse undermining everything that the man was to Alyosha.